Okay, let's now we move to Mr. Guy. Hi, Mr. Guy. So,
Hello.
we have heard you last time. We would like to hear from you. I have read your article in newspaper, and we would like to know more about
Oh, right.
yes, and your legal cases, and how are you dealing with it. And I also came to know I'm not sure if you want to discuss this, whether you're thinking of moving out of Singapore, why and what is
Uh,
you.
um,
Please share and advice
okay.
as well for our.
Okay. So I'll try to touch on a few points that was just covered on. So I suppose just I want to pick up on a few points that other people have said, particularly around parents are the ones inflicting the trauma on the kids, and I think that's something which is very, very true. This trauma on the kids isn't appearing from nowhere. It's appearing to and I do think we really have to consider if we want to improve things for children and situations, we need to consider the dynamics that's leading to that happening. And so we're not gonna, you know, we're not going to solve it unless we can kind of start to erode those dynamics ultimately. Um, and the other thing that I want to pick up on is that um, uh, okay. Well, sorry. I'll go back and I'll explain what happened in my situation. So I didn't want to get divorced, so it was I did everything I could to fight to save my marriage for the benefit of my son. Because so my son has and had quite significant medical needs and learning difficulties, and also being an only child as well, I was very fearful of the impact on him, particularly having no sibling to share the journey with, in his age. So I really didn't want him to have to deal with a divorce, and so it's not something that I wanted. My ex wanted the divorce, and she only wanted it after I discovered that she was having affairs, and then I did try to us to have counselling for us to resolve that, but that was clearly not going anywhere. So she initiated the divorce, and again at that point, I thought it would be relatively straightforward, and that we could separate amicably, and agree reasonable terms to. I was actually sort of hoping at that point actually to have shared care and control, so that and it would be a relatively um, uh, sort of happy reforming of the relationship, in a way that would help the child. Sadly, that wasn't what happened. My ex, even though my ex had she would travel 20 times a year out the country. She was always gone, and by her own admission to myself, wasn't the best parent for the child. Sort of clashed with him, and she decided to fight for sole custody, even, and made the legal process a long, drawn out fight. And I think a little bit like the other lady said, that it's about the financial aspects of the relationship. You know what I mean? It's partly around the face, I think. So I personally, I think there are two issues with that. One is, and I was just thinking as people were talking, because the way Singapore does the financial split in a divorce, I think is causing a lot of the problems. Because I'm from a culture where you get divorced, you just split everything. And then it's like there's never any argument, there's no problem, you just split everything. What's the issue? You're in a marriage, you've committed to something. If you've committed to a marriage, it's because you committed to a union with the other party, right? And there wasn't a game in who's contributing more. But Singapore legal system makes it, oh well, he contributed this much of this and she of this, and it becomes a huge fight, which to me is nonsensical. You know what I mean? And it encourages a lot of deceit. It encourages a lot of manipulation and a lot of acrimony, and I'm sure it feeds the pockets of a lot of lawyers as well as a result. But I think that process of the way the assets get divvied up, and part of that is the point around having to care for the children in order to win the assets. which is the worst thing, because then people will misrepresent actually how good a parent they are, or their relationships with children, in order to win more of the assets. You know what I mean? Because it's like a competition. It feeds huge problems, I think, and so that's a big issue, I think, in terms of the way they approach the financial split. And I mean, I fully agree with what others have said, that, you go into a marriage, you've signed a contract, and you've actually committed your life to helping this other person no matter what. And when you get to divorce, you realize actually no, everybody just pretends that didn't happen. You know what I mean? It's like, and there is, which is, I think, a little bit unreasonable, ultimately. And actually that in itself is probably encourages the divorce to some degree, because it discourages people to resolve and try to work things out. So in my situation, I really thought for years tried to remedy, because it'd been a very long relationship, a very long relationship. We were together for sort of 9 or 10 years, I think, prior to marriage. So it was a long relationship, and we had a child, and then there's like a huge breakdown of trust, right? And the biggest breakdown of trust is actually not because of the infidelity, not from anything because of that, but it's because of the way the other party treats you during the breakdown. You see a side of this person which you just didn't see think was even possible. And that complete lack of trust is quite traumatizing. And it really is. And it also needs you need to reframe your approach and how you deal with things. And actually, I'll touch on one. We're talking about whether or not you blame the other party to the kid. And I completely support everything everyone said, but I'll make an admission here, though, because my child would often ask me, why did we get divorced? Why? I mean, and actually my ex told the child that I did something really bad to her that she can't tell him until he's an adult. And so, um, that kind of hurt me. And it hurt me, the fact that what hurt me the most was that my child thought I wasn't committed to the family and to supporting him. And I had to tell him. I told him that it's because your mother didn't want to be married. You know what I mean? And she was interested in other men. And I had to. I found out today, fun enough. So I found out today, she's married the guy who's in an adulterous relationship with whilst we're still married. So they just got married in the last few weeks. My son told me today. And they put off the marriage, obviously, until a lot of the legal stuff was resolved, because there's legal implications to that. So, but anyway, so I found that out today. And so I mean, I had to share with him, because I didn't want him to think that I wasn't 100% behind him and in support of him, And so it wasn't a case that we simply drifted apart, and I accept that can happen, and that's fine. But when that happens, you don't have the breakdown and the acrimony and the arguments. Arguments is the wrong word, but the acrimony that exists, it doesn't need to happen. So that doesn't explain it, if you know what I'm saying. And so yeah, so I would say that to my child, but not for the reasons really of criticizing the other party, more for really, I wanted him to trust that I was behind him and would not let him down, and that was the main reason behind it. So the problem with the breakdown of what will happen then in a divorce is I think there's a huge fight for control of the child. Right? And one thing I want to mention, because this kind of came up a little bit in the story about restricting access, etc. And it's not a huge problem for me, but it definitely affects everyone. But when one party tries to use control, and it's really, it becomes, to me, that's a hugely dangerous thing. And the problem is, it's almost accepted. And in some ways, this access expectation encourages it, because there's an encouragement that if you put bounds around it, that's okay, as long as it happens. And it allows one party to be hugely controlling, right? And that creates, I think, a lot of problems. And I would go so far to say that, for instance, that I don't think I can be a good father to my son if I'm basically being controlled by my ex-wife, and fit within what she wants me to do. So I'm not prepared to do that. I have shared care and control, but I won't put up with being dictated to or directed by my ex. And I actually sort of think that I accept what the other father was saying, in the sense that you got to be there for your kids. But I think that there's another aspect which is also important. You've got to model to your kid good behavior. You know what I mean? And it's important that you respect yourself and you have dignity. And that you don't put up with too much just to spend time with the child, because you're not giving the child any confidence. You're not modeling to the child, what it is. To be a sort of reasonable, self-respecting adult. So I think that's a problem, in terms of a lot of the control dynamics, because I think, in a lot of these situations, there's a lot of efforts to use relationships with child to antagonize and harass the other party, over small things, or just annoy them. And like it's been said, doing anything about it is really impossible, because the court system, they don't want to know, and it's very expensive. And there is this belief that these organizations make things easy, and that may be the case. I'm glad to hear that seems to be the case in some such, but that's not been my experience at all. And it might be slightly because of the difference of gender dynamics, potentially. But I find I also am PR. I'm not a local, so that those things probably come into play. But my experience has been the opposite. That the organisations that are supposed to help and support don't do so. And everything is made incredibly different and expensive. So one point that I'll touch on. When my son was having a lot of trauma, he was saying sort of things related to self-harm, trying to run away from. He tried to run away from home naked once. I had to catch him at the top of a gate when he tried to climb out and run away naked in the middle of the day, and because he was so traumatized. And I kind of that really upset me. And he was hysterical. And in any case, I had to help my son. And so he hadn't had my ex wouldn't allow any at that point, wouldn't allow any counselling. I think she was afraid of what he might say to the counsellor. And so but then there was an opportunity, because of some of his issues at school, for him to have school counselling. So and I had a psychologist report that that sort of covered some examples of the behavior and what he was enduring. And so when the opportunity for counselling came up, they said, we're very limited on resources, so it's only a priority basis. And so I sent them this report that I had, that at that point we put in the divorce papers. And so, but that was sort of 6 months earlier. And then my ex was very upset, because she felt it was not, she felt it was defamatory to her. And so that kicked off more legal cases. And I, as a result of trying to get him counselling with a school counsellor, I think I spent $250,000 Singapore dollars on legal fees. And so and it's not finished. And that's what can happen with the legal system here, and it's exhausting. I mean, when we talk about, it's funny you talk about expenses, right? So often the process makes a big meal over relatively small expenses, but there are some huge expenses that are just ignored when it comes to the legal fees, etc. And in my case, I've not worked for about 4 years. I've had to focus on my son's care, and I've tried to focus on sort of resolving his situation. And partly because of psychology. I mean, I was diagnosed with dyslexia as a kid. I'm a little bit um, neurodiverse, or in the sense that I'm quite good at focusing on something, but dealing with a lot of things at once is not necessarily easy. So I've just had to sort of focus on the situation. And now the problem with the shared care situation is I end up in a situation where I care for him half the week, and I stay in a HDB place, and in that situation, and unfortunately, because of a lot of the legal stuff, and this is a point too as well. So the thing is, even though I've got shared care, I don't feel like I'm parent my child anymore, and this is maybe, I don't know, a problem in the sense that so slowly all of my abilities to make decisions for him, even though prior to the breakdown I would do all of the decisions, practically, in terms of the key ones with medical care and educational care. They were all left to me to research and decide. But all of a sudden they become a battlefield, and unfortunately I can't compete with my ex's lawyer, and they've been taken away from me. And so I get to spend good time with my child, which is great, and I enjoy it. I know he enjoys. And but all of my abilities to parent him have gone away. And so I yeah, I kind of think that that's a problem, and it's not a sustainable situation, because again, also with regards to the maintenance thing as well. I mean, you'll know, right? The law's very biased on this. So for instance, it says that men can't receive maintenance from a woman, which I don't believe should necessarily be the case in today's age. So, but it's reflective of what is essentially quite an antiquated system. In our case, there's not maintenance either way, but I mean, my ex earns a considerable amount of money, and the person she's married also earns a considerable amount of money, and uh, he's senior to her in her company, and an awful lot of money, and more than me at the time of the divorce. She was earning a similar but more, and so yet I have to pay my ex a considerable amount of money every month, and it's like it's quite a skewed, unfair situation. It's quite complex to go into quite as to why, but I received an email today from the court saying I have a hearing in 2 weeks, which I wasn't even aware of. So there's been another case against me over something, and that's happening all the time right now. And I can't afford to use a lawyer, because and my ex can just continually get more lawyers to start more actions. And
Sorry,
if
Mr. Pai,
I,
I feel strongly
sorry,
that, sorry. I feel strongly the legal action after marriage is actually just a harassment, nothing much. It's a
I agree. I agree.
harassment,
Yeah.
and it's more expensive than getting married.